Again. Hi, everybody. I'm Juliana Fagiardini, your host today with the first Suricata webinar of 2025. We are back. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. Together with me, we have Tony Robinson, who will be our speaker with a talk that should have happened during Suricon last year, but he couldn't join us in person. So he was kind enough to prepare this for a webinar, and we are grateful that you are here with us today. And we also have Dr. Kelly Misata, our director, and she will be my co-host. She will be checking the chat and the Q&A section in case you have questions to post them there. Before we get started, a few words about OISF. It is a US-based non-profit, and it's responsible for maintaining Suricata and ensuring that we can keep going. It is funded by donations from world-class security organizations from around the globe who support and believe in our mission. If you would like to become a consortium member or know more about them, just check our page. That is on Suricata or OISF. If by any chance you don't know what Suricata is, we are far more than just an IDS or IPS. We are a network monitoring and threat detection open source technology that is used by many public and private sector companies, and we offer IDS alerts, we log protocol transactions, network flows. We have the ability to record capture sections, packet capture sections, both conditionally or not, and we also extract files. For a more complete list of our features, please check our webpage, which is suricata.io/features. And without further ado, it's show time. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Tony Robinson, who is a threat researcher with Proofpoint, and he has a lot to share. We are glad to have him today here, and we hope to see him also in Suricon in Montreal this year. Tony, the floor is yours.
All right. To get started here, I'd like to thank both Kelly and Juliana here for offering to host me. So the reason why I couldn't make it to Suricon this year, I'm going to talk while I try and get my slide deck up and running. The reason I couldn't make it is because I got sick right beforehand. I got pneumonia. It was pretty bad. So the day before I was due to fly out, I ended up getting pneumonia, and so it was kind of a last minute. I had to cancel everything because the doc said you're not healthy enough to fly. You would be hospitalized otherwise. So the OISF team and Kelly offered to have me show up for a webinar beginning this year. A nice way to start off 2025, I think. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to get a chance to talk about this. As it's been stated multiple times all over social media, the point of this talk is going to be covering a couple of Honeytoken IDS rules. We'll get more into what a Honeytoken IDS rule is later, and also making use of portions of the ET info rule set for Suricata.
Tony,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt. You're showing your presenter view.
Let me see if I can switch that around. Let's see here. I'm going to try and move this over to the other screen, and we're going to see that's probably not working.
Yep, that works
great. It is working now.
Oh, okay, awesome.
You didn't hit the presentation mode.
That's my bad.
So
All
now
right.
everybody's really excited about those slides coming up, so no pressure.
All right. So to continue, we're going to do Honeytoken rules, and I'm going to talk about some of the ET info rules that, at least for us over at Proofpoint and Emerging Threats, have been high impact for our sandboxing and malware analysis purposes. They show us anomalies and lead to better threat detection and more specific threat detection. So before we get even deeper into this, in addition to thanking Juliana and Kelly today, I also wanted to offer a huge thanks to Jason and Victor. They were the ones that on social media said you should really present something at Suricon and try to submit something. So if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be talking with you guys today. Also, for those of you who have to cut and run for any reason, you can screen cap this right now. And this slide deck is already online, as well as all of the supporting materials, URLs I've mentioned, Cyber Chef recipes, the whole 9 yards. We'll be getting into that a little bit later. It's all available on my GitHub. So, a little bit of background on me. I am with Proofpoint Emerging Threats. I've been a senior security researcher with them for about 3 years now. I've got about 10 years of experience altogether in cybersecurity. I live in Chesterfield, Michigan, which is a small town just north of Detroit, about 40 minutes or so. I'm happily married. I've got two basset hounds who have been thankfully pretty quiet this morning. And I'm your typical nerd. I love good food. I love playing video games, like anime and manga. And if you might know me as being a self-published author, I came up with a book called Building Virtual Machine Labs, a hands-on guide. So that's me in a nutshell. With that all out of the way, let's talk about the ET info rule set a little bit here. So oh, wait, there we go. Skipped one. So, ET info, the cut and dry definition that we have for this particular category in the emerging threats rule set, it's for signatures to help provide audit level events that are useful for correlation and identifying interesting activity, which may or may not inherently be malicious, but is often observed in malware and other threats. The long and short of that is that these rules could alert on activity that really doesn't concern you, but in the right context, they can indicate that something interesting is going on in the network, and it could be a starting point for threat hunting and other investigations and things to take a look at that are outside of the norm. So it's all based on context, and that can differ from network to network, of course. Something else I wanted to talk about before we got into some of the more interesting rules here is last year we published a what we call a rule fork over at Emerging Threats for Suricata 7.0.3. So that means the features that are available in that version of Suricata, we support using those features for the Suricata 7.0.3 rule set and allows us to make more interesting rules, use some of the new features, some of the new keywords, some of the new sticky buffers that are specific to that version. In addition to that, we have split out a couple of subcategories from ET info. We such as the file sharing category, dynamic DNS rules, remote access, and TA or threat actor abuse services. In addition to that, we decided to merge the ET policy rule set back into ET info because we kind of didn't want to be the arbiter of what is considered a policy violation for networks or not. Those are just kind of informational rules. And whether or not they violate a company's policy should be up to the company. And so we kind of just said these are more informational. Let's just merge it back into ET info. So, getting into a couple of the different types of rules that we use in our sandboxing and malware analysis, I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the huge set of DNS over HTTPS rules that we have. I'm going to refer to it as DOH from here on out because DNS over HTTPS is kind of a mouthful. The long and short of it is that DOH is DNS queries wrapped in TLS and HTTP2. Um, it was supposedly a protocol that was designed for privacy. It's kind of bad for network visibility because of the encryption, obviously, but if you read the RFC for it, privacy isn't really mentioned as like a core feature of the protocol. It's a little bit more difficult to block. It's something else that is sending its data over HTTPS. So in terms of firewall rules and kind of trying to block it and trying to set up policy to not be able to use it, it's really difficult to do that in this day and age. I have a whole host of links here. Again, the links are available in the slide deck and in the supporting material that's on my GitHub. Of a variety of tools and a variety of different threat actors and different malware that has used DOH either for their signaling, their C2, or as just a way to transfer data as an implant or something of that nature. We also have links here over to the curl GitHub because they have a whole list of DNS over HTTPS providers, and that helps to kind of keep us informed on new providers coming around and making sure that we at least have the ability to detect them and see them on the network and provide rules for those as new providers come around and things of that nature. Another set of rules that does hard work for us is rules that look at external IP lookup services. This is like when you go to Google or if you go to whatismyipaddress.com and it says your IP address is this. And a lot of the times, bad guys will use those services, and some of those services even do geolocation and will tell you other contextual information about that IP address. Bad guys will use this for geofencing in order to make sure that certain hosts are infected or certain hosts are not infected. And sometimes they use it just for getting an idea, keeping track of what hosts are where for different remote access panels or different bot channels and things of that nature. A lot of malware, especially remote access Trojans and information stealers, the first thing it'll do as kind of a connectivity check is talk to these services and say, hey, what's the IP address of the machine that I just infected? I need to know this in order to make sure I have network connectivity. And if those connectivity checks fail, then most of the time the malware is just like, I'm out and just either crashes the process or just exits. That's it. So these rules are a really good early indicator of malicious activity. Sometimes we've seen legitimate software using these services, but it's kind of few and far in between, and there are a lot of these services out there. We just write signatures to detect lookups to these services as we see them. Another set of rules is looking for pastebin-like services. If you're not familiar, pastebin services are a service where either with a registered user account or anonymously, users can dump text to a website and then they can link other people to it. Most of the times, this is used for troubleshooting stuff, like you might have log files that you need to share. And one of the best ways to do that is through a pastebin site. It's just here's my logs for the problem that I'm running into. Can you take a look? But they're used for a variety of other things as well. A lot of them malicious, hosting multiple stages for malware. Here's a block of base64 encoded data that's on this pastebin site, decode it, and run the executable that is the end result, is the most common scenario that we see with that. URL shorteners are very commonly abused with all sorts of malware campaigns. I've got a couple here that we wrote blogs about. I got one here from Proofpoint where we wrote about Silent Librarian. Generally speaking, URL shorteners take a long URL and shorten it into something much smaller to where the URL is easier to share, but at the same time, it obfuscates where it's going. And in some cases with custom URL shorteners, sometimes the bad guys have their own special URL shorteners where they will do all sorts of processing in the background to see whether or not this is the right host, what type of operating system they're running, what kind of web browser they're running, the IP address and geolocation stuff that I was talking about earlier. So when we see URL shorteners, and it's not typically something used in your guys' organization, that might be something that would be worth investigating a little bit further. Another set of rules that we see in AT-Info that does pretty hard work in our sandboxes are what we call dotted quad host file downloads. So typically when you send an HTTP or HTTPS request to something, The host field is going to be filled out with the host name or the domain name of the web server you're talking to as a part of that header, right? Uh, what this detects is if the host field in the HTTP header is an IP address or an IPv4 address specifically, and it's requesting a specific type of file in the URI through a GET request. So like a PS1, a zip file, a RAR, EXEs, DLLs, other script files like .py, .sh, things of that nature. We see this pretty commonly with information stealers. A lot of info stealers will claim, oh, we've got the smallest executable. It's only this many kilobytes. And then as soon as that executable runs, it immediately goes out and says, I need to grab like 20 DLLs in order to be able to parse all of this data on the host. I need to be able to read SQLite databases in order to collect cookies, in order to collect session data. I need to I need all of these different DLLs to decode this data specifically in this format in order for me to dump it to a zip file and send it off to the info stealer panel or the file hosting website that they want me to upload this to. A couple of honorable mentions, since this is kind of getting long in the tooth as it is, that I wanted to mention here is that we have specific rules and a couple of categories here, such as downloading executables without a user agent. A lot of the time with HTTP traffic, you're going to have a user agent to identify the web browser and what capabilities that web browser has. And if you see a GET request or a POST request without a user agent, like, that's a little interesting. That's outside of the norm. Why did it do that? Hunting requests for very short file names that are executables like 1.exe or a.exe or 123.exe. Again, typically when you're downloading a file, the file name will provide some kind of a description of what it is. And if it's not doing that, then that's suspicious activity that needs further investigation. Suspicious TLDs like .science, .xyz. These are TLDs that we've seen in the past that are kind of like the scourge of internet traffic, where they're not as well policed, or they have a tendency to have a little bit more malicious traffic than normal. I want to say it was um, I've lost my train of thought there, but I'll come back to it later. I'll probably remember what I was going to use as an example. But anyway, we're going to continue on. Talking about terse requests for file names, not just executables, terse requests for, again, those file types that I mentioned before, .ps1, .zip, .exe, .dll. If we see short requests that have very few headers, no user agent, no other information other than here's the URI and here's the host for it to identify where it's going, those are suspicious as well, and we want to know more about that. Let's talk more about some specific services that we see getting abused in our sandbox. Anything that touches Discord, Telegram, those are, your typical chat services out there. Anon files or Go file is probably related to an information stealer of some sort. We see a lot of info stealers using Discord and Telegram as a backend for command and control. And then we see a lot of them uploading the zip files from the information that they've gathered from a host to a file hosting service like Anon Files or Go File or something of that nature, if not going directly to the C2 panel itself. A couple more honorable mentions. Since the TA abuse services and file sharing categories were originally a part of ET-Info, I felt it was a good idea to mention that they do a lot of good work for us as well in our sandbox, and it would definitely benefit you to make use of those rules and enable them. So now that I've kind of said, here's all of the stuff that we've seen that has provided us value, might not be a complete set of all of the cool and good ET-Info rule sets or rule categories that are useful, but this is the stuff we've seen. How do I go about modifying my rule set to enable just these rules? And that's one of the purposes that Suricata update that Suricata update provides for users of Suricata. It's a rule management tool that's shipped by the OISF. It comes with the Suricata tarball, or you can get it through the pip Python package manager, and that is a tongue twister. Uh, but to put it in a nutshell, it's almost the same as Snort's pulled pork script, which is their rule management system. Except in my opinion, I think it's a little bit better. So I'm going to go into some of the configuration files. I'm not going to sit here and read every single thing on the slide here. What I will tell you is that the three that we're the most worried about on this page are the update.yaml, the disable.conf, and the enable.conf. And the reason why we care about those ones in particular is that the update.yaml is going to determine what rule set you're downloading. By default, that's the ET open rule set, but you can modify it and you can choose alternative rule sets, or if you have an ET Pro account, you can put your ET Pro OINT code in there and it will grab the Pro set of rules instead. And then the disable and enable.conf are important because, of course, those are going to control what rules are going to get enabled in your rule set that you're running and disabled and enabled. And the Suricata update script has an order of operations that it checks these configuration files in. So what this allows us to do is we could say, I want you to disable everything in the ET info rule set, and then immediately afterwards come back and look at the enable.conf and say, okay, we only want to enable these specific rules with this content in the message string, or these particular SID numbers, or these that come in these particularly named text files or groups or things of that nature. And that's where I talk about rule matching operations here. In the disable and these configuration files, disable, enable, drop, and modify, you can tell Suricata update to search by the signature ID or the SID field. You can use a regular expression to look for portions of a rule or a text string in the portion of the rule. You can kind of do it by grouping or by the file name that the rule ships in. So this is what the disable.conf would look like if we wanted to disable everything in ET info. And then the enable.conf here, I have a couple of regular expression settings to say if it contains dotted quad, paste bin, URL shorteners, external IP, DNS over HTTPS, specific SIDs, anything with Discord in it. If I want to re-enable those ones to kind of re-enable the rules that I was talking about in the slide deck here. So this is what Suricata update is going to look like when we're running it, and we tell it to disable these particular rules and then re-enable only the ones we're interested in. I'm telling Suricata update here to look for the Suricata 7.0.3 rule set. Here is where my disable.conf file is. Here is where my enable.conf file is, and the directory that I'm running Suricata update in. And then we can see here that it finds Suricata version 7.03. It's going to download that rule set. It found our disable and enable configuration files, and then it goes through and says, I disabled everything in ET info, and then I just re-enabled the stuff that you're interested in specifically. So that was ET info in a nutshell. And if any of you guys have any questions or anything that you want to talk about, feel free to drop it in Q&A and we'll try and talk about that once everything's all said and done here. This is what I think the more interesting part of the talk and some of the cool things that I noticed when I first came over to Proofpoint Emerging Threats. So we have a pretty significant sandbox and a lot of malware that we get to look at and we get to see executing. And I noticed when I first came over here that we had IDS SIGs that look for particular host names or particular hardware IDs for our malware sandbox leaving the network. And that could be through the TCP protocol, UDP, or through HTTP requests. We're interested in seeing, and then I realized, is this something that our user base might be interested in? We can create rules that are looking for particular host artifacts leaving the network. And you can kind of use that as an early warning system or as a system to detect anomalies that and maybe lead to more specific malware detection capabilities. And this is the concept of a Honeytoken IDS rule. If you're not familiar with what a Honeytoken is, it is a form of like it is a way to kind of take fake data and put it on your network in places where a bad guy would look to gather that information. These could be fake login credentials, these could be email addresses, they could be sensitive files, they could be certain commands that are being run. When you create a honey token, you're trying to put enticing data somewhere where a attacker would want to where an attacker would look and want to grab that data. When they go to grab it or look at it or open the file, there is some sort of a script that informs the users, hey, a bad guy's looked at this. And in some cases, will even say, here's profiling information for that bad guy. Here's their IP address. Here's their user agent. Here's the things that they or here's some aspects about them. So it's a way to kind of get an idea that the bad guys are looking actively at interesting information that you've left out there for them to find. When we talk about Honeytoken IDS rules, again, this is taking your unique host artifacts for your network or for your sandbox or for your critical hosts and turning those into IDS rules that we can then turn into an early warning system. And again, this would be things like a particular host name, DNS suffixes, users that are in your network, MAC addresses for your specific hosts, um, Windows machine goods or hardware IDs, things of that nature that are specific to just your systems. And that would be the reason why we couldn't provide these rules to you as a part of the ET rule set, is because they need to be generated on a host and on a case by case basis, host by host, network by network. But they would be specific to you. And if you've seen these artifacts leaving your network, that's a starting point for a threat hunt or an investigation. So where do you find this information? There are a variety of different commands that you can run on Windows to get this information about your hosts. That would be your msinfo32, system info, looking at particular registry keys. I'm going to say that the machine GUID registry key is one that a lot of pieces of malware, remote access Trojans, and information stealers are very interested in, because in addition to using IP addresses to identify unique hosts, a lot of these pieces of malware will grab the machine GUID to uniquely identify different Windows hosts from one another. So we'll commonly see that getting posted out to the bad guys C2, or leaving the network in some way, shape, or form to uniquely identify hosts that they have infected. Common commands like who am I, ipconfig, and wmic queries as well to look for what type of video controller is installed, what the drive looks like, what the serial number for that drive is, serial numbers and manufacturers for the motherboard that's installed on the system. Sometimes these are anti-VM checks, but other times these are bits of information that information stealers and other remote access Trojans just gather to have a profile on what the capabilities of a particular host is. So this is some of the output from these different commands, just going over them. Looking at wmic disk drive get description, what the ID is for the device, any unique serial numbers, any unique vendor names, looking at your ipconfig output, getting the physical or MAC address of your host and using that as a detection signature, the DNS suffix for your local network. These are all wonderful bits of data that you can use to create Honeytoken IDS rules. And on the Linux side, we have a whole host of command line commands such as ID, uname TAC-A, LSB release, looking at the etc release or etc version files, looking at the output of IP-link, the IP-ADDR commands, the various commands to do LSCPU, LSPCI, and LSUSB, and looking at all of those unique pieces of hardware, serial numbers, and things like that that just uniquely identify that host. These are things that the bad guys are interested in and will probably be exfiltrated at some point. So they also make for good Honeytoken IDS rules. So now that we've got all this information, how do we turn it into IDS rules? We can start with the most basic form, and that would just be creating rules to look for HTTP GET or POST requests with this information somewhere in either the URI or the request body going outbound, or just general rules looking for these particular strings and just general TCP or UDP traffic. So I've got a couple of example rules that I've included in the slide deck that will serve as a starting point, but really your imagination is the limit here. So I've got a couple of example GET and POST requests that just contain the machine GUID for one of my malware analysis boxes that's literally sitting right behind me. And we're just looking for really basic content matches in either the request body or the HTTP URI leaving our home network. We have a couple of rules here for the MAC address as well of that same malware analysis host behind me. So this is a really basic starting point, and this will probably get you pretty good mileage. And then we can talk a little bit about some of those unique transformations. It's one thing for me to tell you that you can apply transformations to encode this data or obfuscate it in a variety of manners. It's another thing for me to tell you how to do it. And one of the most useful tools that we use for doing that in the cybersecurity community is CyberChef. I got a link here to the GCHQ GitHub for their instance of it where you can download a copy. And the most wonderful thing about CyberChef is you input data and then you can give it a variety of recipes in order to change how that data is formatted. And then we can take that newly formatted or newly obfuscated data, and that becomes a new IDS rule for us. So for example, I have a set of rules here to look for the MAC address of my malware host that's hex encoded, decimal encoded, base 58, base 32, UU encoded. These are a variety of different encoding mechanisms that historically, even some nation state actors have used to obfuscate or encode this data to, make it less obvious what information they're trying to exfiltrate out of the network. I wanted to talk a little bit about base 64, and this is something that I learned when I joined Emerging Threats that I did not know before, but there's a concept with base 64 called offsets, and CyberChef will even allow you to create rules with this in mind as well. When you encode base 64 data, the whole concept of an offset is depending on what data comes before the data that you want to base 64 encode and what data comes afterwards, the base 64 encoding or the format of that data is going to change. So you can input the data that you want to base 64 encode. You can use the show offset recipes, and CyberChef will show you here's the portions that will always stay the same. Here's the portions that might change if it's surrounded by different bits of data. And I've highlighted here in the yellow squares. Here are the important parts that we would want to write content matches for to look for data that is at offset 1, offset 0, offset 2. Here's different ways that data might be encoded if there's surrounding data next to it. So the whole gist of this is that if you want to create rules to detect base 64 encoding going outbound, make use of the show off base 64 offsets recipe, and you're going to end up with 3 different rules for that to detect those transformations depending on what data is next to it. And kind of as a final bonus round, I wanted to talk a little bit more about XOR rainbow tables. So in a nutshell, XOR encoding allows you to do some bitwise math to data to kind of change how it appears drastically. And what we are talking about doing here is making use of CyberChef to kind of create a rainbow table. We can create a rainbow table of rules for either a XOR key of 1 byte or 2 bytes altogether, and that allows us to detect a particular piece of data or a particular artifact for a host being encoded in any one of those ways with any one of those XOR keys. It's the same kind of concept where um, hackers would come up with rainbow tables for different hashing mechanisms in order to more effectively guess passwords. We're just applying this to XOR, and we're applying this in a method to where we can detect a variety of different encoding keys or transformation keys for data that is leaving our network. So this is a somewhat long CyberChef script. It's not too terribly complicated, but the gist of what the screen cap is showing is that we are making use of the XOR brute force recipe here. We're telling it to show us an XOR key or show us only XOR keys that are 1 byte in length. So we're going to get 255 results here. And then we're using a series of find and replaces here to kind of create a scaffolding or rule scaffolding that can instantly be turned into a Suricata IDS rule. So we apply these find and replaces, and that turns just from a string that shows you here's what that obfuscated data looks like if you're using XOR key 01, 02, 03, and so on and so forth. And instead, this is a HTTP Suricata rule looking for that content match or that particular hex string in an HTTP stream. Right here, like the scaffolding I'm using is for a post request. You can always change these find and replace strings here that I have on the side with different rule types that you would like to use. But again, this is one of the supporting pieces of data that I put in the GitHub, the entire recipe. So that serves as a wonderful starting point for you to kind of try and do this on your own. You might notice if you're looking at these rules here that none of them have a SID number defined with them, and that's going to be a problem that Suricata will not like. Suricata wants a SID number next to everything. And for most rules that you create on your own, the recommended SID number range is usually from 1 million to 1,999,999 for the local rules range. The problem is I don't know what number to start at here and what number to give you, but you can input that yourself using a script that I've also provided in that GitHub link as well. This is a Siderator. It's a very simple script where you can take the output from that CyberChef recipe that I showed you and dump it into a directory, and you can run the script and tell it what SID number to start at, and the output will be a local.rules file that starts numbering SIDs for those rules from whatever number you gave it, or if you didn't give it a number, it will start from 1 million and progress from there. So this is just like an example of what the script does. We have a rules.txt file that I downloaded from CyberChef from the output of those recipes. And then I just ran Siderator with no arguments, and it immediately gave me here's SID number 1 million to start with. But the help information and the help output here will tell you what options are available. And you can use the TACS option here to define what SID number to start with, what the input and output files on, and so on and so forth. But that was my talk in a nutshell, and I think I talked a little bit quicker than normal, so I got done a little bit quicker here than I intended. But to end off my talk here, I wanted to invite people to come over to the discourse forum for the emerging threats teams over at community.emergingthreats.net. And yeah, even though I kind of just got done bad-mouthing Discord, it's also one of our points of presence for the emerging threats team. And we invite people to come over and talk to us and give us feedback about our rules, give us more information. Tell us what you would like to see, what you don't like seeing, and ways to just improve the rule set and make it more useful for you. Again, I have a link here to my GitHub where you can get a copy of the slide deck, the CyberChef recipe I mentioned a little bit ago, the SID iterator script, and other source materials as you see fit. But I hope that this was at least somewhat enlightening and that you learned something new from it. Okay.
Thank you, Tori. I was copying the link.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
to-
Let me bring that back up. I
No,
kind
it's
of
it's
moved a
fun.
little quick.
It's so good. Okay, someone else also did it, so it's all there. People,
There you
do
go.
you have more questions for Tony? Take advantage of that. We still have some time. So if you would like him to expand on anything or show some other cool thing that he's been doing, this is the moment.
So I got something else cool to kind of demo if we got a little bit of time later, but I'd like to leave it open for you all if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to add or anything that you'd like to talk about.
So there's a question in the chat, Tony. What is the strangest or most complicated Suricata rule you've had to write?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad that it got asked. It's pretty interesting that we have a good number of complex Suricata rules. One of the things that I've been working a lot with recently is there was a wonderful post on the discourse community site where one of our former ET members, Brandon Murphy, wrote a rule on using byte jump and is data at to check the kind of check the size of a payload for like a remote access Trojan or something of that nature. I've been making really good use of that blog post, and if I can find it, I'll link to it. But if not, come on over to the community site. It's definitely there, and it's the title of the post is "The Complexities of Byte Jump." But in a nutshell, what you can do, let's say you have a remote access Trojan, and this remote access Trojan has a particular packet struct. And as a part of that structure, somewhere it says, here's a number of bytes that I'm going to dedicate to just tell the rat or the C2 on the other side, this is how big the payload is. What we can do with byte jump is we can read the value of those bytes, however many is allocated for that size field. And then we could say, I want to jump that far into the payload. And we can combine that with is data at to say, is this actually the end of the payload? And if it returns, yeah, this is the end of the payload, if there's no data past a certain point that I want you to check, we can more definitively confirm that it's a remote access Trojan that has these features or is using a field to kind of define how big it is. This works really well for rats where the size of the data isn't always consistent. So that was a really cool trick that I didn't know about before Brandon showed it to us, and that I made a lot better use of over the last couple of months.
And then there's another question. What about explosion of the number of rules?
Explosion of the number of rules. Are we talking about the result of kind of making your own custom rules, or just in general the explosion of the number of rules?
Unless the person who put the question in the Q&A, I won't call out your name directly. If you want to put more context in the chat, that would be useful.
So, well,
Yes, about the
for
rainbow.
generating the rules, you're talking about hundreds. How do you manage it? Well, that's really left as an exercise up to the user. Everybody that I know that uses Suricata has a different use case for utilizing it. And how you guys manage that, you could be using a completely different rule management engine from um, one network completely to another. So I really don't have an answer for that. I would say that if you wanted to try using these Honeytoken IDS rules and using these more interesting rules, that a starting point would be to use it with either a honeypot or with a malware sandboxing solution to get started. And then also in terms of using it for a production system, limiting it to what are considered your most important assets or the assets that you're going to see doing outbound network connectivity the most. And I know that's kind of a loaded statement. Everything talks to the internet, everything wants to talk to the internet. But those are my recommendations for getting started. And that's about all I've really got on that, unfortunately.
There's great
Private SID number
conversations
ranges.
happening in the chat right now. Um, Happy to have folks continue asking questions and chatting with one another in our Discord channels as well. And if you have a request for Tony to submit for SuriCon 2025 in Montreal, as a follow-up to this talk, feel free to, put the pressure on him to submit another talk.
I think there's a question in the chat as well. Are there any future plans to develop response actions based on the D3F?
The defend framework.
Yeah.
So I can't answer definitively for either Proofpoint or the ET team in general, but I will say that Defend is still somewhat new. And to be honest, our big contention and big adventure right now is that we're working more towards getting better metadata in general for our rule set. It's been a huge fight with one of our other team members, James, has been working really hard and making sure that we have valid and accurate metadata for our rules, and he's been working on improving that significantly for our rule set as it is. And right now, we're focusing on being able to fill out the severity fields and also fill out the MITRE data for our rules. So we're focusing on the metadata that we currently have as opposed to adding another framework on top of it. I'm not saying that Defend won't be something that we will go towards at a later date, but we really want to focus on being able to fill out severity, fill out target data, fill out MITRE tags for rules, and make sure that those are accurate so that you can have a better, more custom tuned rule set for those tags and for that data. I hope that answers the question. I'm sorry if it's not it's not the answer you're looking for right now, but I'm not saying it's off the table. It's something that we might be looking at in the future.
Okay, right now I don't see any other questions. We have roughly 11 minutes to wrap up.
I just want to say real briefly, not to interrupt, thanks everybody for the questions. I'm happy to answer more if you come up with them later. And hope to see you guys on our community site for that.
Hey, Tony, do you have time to do the demo you mentioned?
Oh yeah, so definitely. So this is just a little side project. It's kind of tangentially related to what we've been talking about here. I know I can't really do a show of hands who has heard of Dalton out in the audience today, but if anybody here is familiar with Dalton, if you're not familiar with it, Dalton is a SecureWorks project that, to describe it as briefly as possible, it's an IDS rule testing harness. It's really amazing. I love it. It provides a great starting point if you would like to test and you would like to try writing your own rules. So I've been working with some of the SecureWorks staff about getting some changes added to Dalton. They're not too significant right now. Like the biggest one that I managed to work with them on is helping them to update the container versions for that they're using for hosting Suricata and Snort. It used to be Ubuntu 16.04, and we worked together, and I helped them do testing to upgrade the Docker containers that are used as a part of the project to use Ubuntu 24.04. So that's like some backend stuff, to make sure that Dalton is still maintainable and is being kept up to date and things of that nature. But one of the cooler things that has not been merged in yet, but has been approved for merging, is I wanted to see if we could get some integration of CyberChef into the platform. And this isn't like a super complex thing, but I will be happy to share it. I'm going to switch what I am sharing over to my lab environment briefly. And you should be seeing my web browser pointed at Dalton right now. Are you guys seeing that?
Yep.
So this isn't anything too terribly complex, but this is like one of those nice to haves. I mentioned using Dalton a lot for doing conversions and converting different encoding mechanisms and whatnot, and having it available and integrated in with Dalton is something pretty awesome. All I did was add some stuff on the backside to add a Docker container for CyberChef, do the Nginx configs to point to it, and make it to where there is a nice little link here for CyberChef to be included in the web interface. That way, when you just middle click it, or when you left click on it, you get the CyberChef interface. But if you were to open it in a new tab, or if you were to middle click it, you get a nice tab here with CyberChef, and it's all integrated in with Dalton. It's all run as part of the same package, and you have it on hand instead of having to fire up a separate instance, a separate VM, maintain the source package on your host, or anything of that nature. I mean, again, it's not too complicated. It's not too game changing, but it was something cool that I wanted to see added to the project that I thought would benefit rule writers and Suricata enthusiasts. So I just went about submitting a pull request, and the SecureWorks guys are pretty good about responding to them. And that's pretty much all I wanted to show, is that you got CyberChef now. Well, once the pull request comes in, but this is just something cool that's coming down the pipe that I wanted to show everybody.
Thank you. We have someone saying that the CyberChef's rainbow table has blown their mind. That is nice. Someone else also saying that the integration is cool, which I agree.
I'm really happy if y'all got something out of it. And again, I'm always open to feedback. I'm always looking to, help improve our rule set. If you got any questions about this talk, or if there's anything that you want to talk about in terms of the ET rule set, I invite you to come to community.emergingthreats.net to come and talk with us. I'm happy to answer questions as they come up. And if you have anything interesting that you're seeing out there from, putting your new Honeytoken rules out there that you want to share with us, we're good with that too.
There's someone asking if there's a cheat sheet for initials like ET, TA, etc.
Actually, for it, in terms of like the rule set for the initials and some of the, I know we're like kind of initial heavy, and all of that. We do have a post on the community site that kind of lays out what the different categories are of the emerging threats rule set arc. Most of the times, if you see ET in that context, it just means emerging threat. If you see ET open, that's the open rule set. ET pro, that's the emerging threats pro rule set. But ET in general just means emerging threats. And the initials like TA and whatnot, those are explained a little bit better on the community site for the different rule categories. So we definitely have that information available, and I'm happy to share it.
Okay, no other questions for now. So I think up to this point, we had a great webinar. Thank you. I will just say a few words to wrap up. Can you all see my screen?
Looks good.
Thank you. So just wanted to invite you all to stay tuned. We have a lot going on always with Suricata, and more so this year. Join our community in case you are not in our forum where you can ask questions, or in our Discord where you can connect with our founder, the development team, and our worldwide community. We are here and there to help. We will be having Suricon this year again in person. It will be in Montreal, and hopefully we will be sharing the dates in a few weeks. The call for talks should open in February. Keep an eye on for that. See, Tony? There's also a sponsorship available in case you or your company would like to sponsor us. This is very important to keep this great conference happening. And if you join, if you go to suricon.net, you will find all of that and also 10 years of content in our archives for all our past talks. And speaking of talks, we still have another webinar this month. It will be on the 23rd with Monsieur Eric Leblond, and it's about everything you wanted to ask or know about Suricata file extraction, but never dared to ask. Do register. Hope to see you there. This is all that I have for today. Thanks again, Kelly, for running the chat and everything, and Tony for presenting this very cool talk, and to all who joined us.
Thanks for having me, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I
everybody.
think-
Okay, stopping the recording.